Hello friends, welcome. Friends, I saw this article which is the parliamentary panel wants end use of spectrum clearly defined in the auction, mechanism to track rollout. Now this was an article which was published on 21st March 2025 by PTI. And it talks about the synopsis of this article is that a parliamentary panel recommends a clear guideline and robust mechanism for spectrum auction to avoid situations like undue advantage to Reliance Jio, alleged gain in the past BWA auction. Panel suggests aligning the migration pricing and the current market rates and establish post-auction review mechanism to ensure efficient spectrum utilization to prevent financial advantages. Now, there is one line which is very important. The CAG report cites that how in CAG report of 2015 cites that how deficiency in the past BWA auction led to an undue advantage of rupees 3,367 crores to Reliance Jio, previously Infotel. Now friends, why I am doing this video? Why I am showing you this article? Because as soon as I saw this article, memories became clear in my mind. Because when the 2010 auction was happening, I was bidding for Qualcomm in the bidding room. And I'm completely clear as to what happened at that particular moment of time, what were the deficiencies and what were the issues that were prevalent at that particular point of time. Now, here, whenever there is a conclusion drawn, the CAG has said many things in their report, but what got highlighted is this number 3,367 crores of undue advantage to Reliance. Now the question is that was this an undue advantage? Was this accurately quantified, or CAG committed a mistake in their quantification? What actually happened? What were the deficiencies and what were the kind of problems that actually emanated, and is the parliamentary committee recommendation is correct to overcome those deficiencies? This is exactly what I'm going to talk in this video, so that be with me and you'll understand that how confusing the licensing structure in India was. Because of that, these kind of problems emanated, and how wrong conclusions were drawn by respected agencies like CAG. Because the system was so confusing. So you can basically make a circular argument by pointing one point to another point without justifying the other point, or whether that point was accurate or not, whether it was foundationally based on a solid fundamentals or not. And then on the basis of that, you make conclusion. Though CAG was quite correct to point out many deficiencies, which I'm going to talk about in this video, but its conclusion about the 3,000 crore loss was not correct. And that's all the purpose of this video. And I'm going to take this opportunity to lay out how we have moved forward and what were the deficiencies at the point when this auction took place, and why those deficiencies played out, and what kind of confusion it created in the market, and what should we learn from our past mistake. That's the whole idea of this video. So before I go forward and explain and take you through the CAG report, and this will be a very important video, by the way. Those who want to learn regulation, those who want to understand what happened in past, for them this is going to be a very, very important video. So now if you look at the eligibility criteria for bidding for BWA, you will notice that there are two different licenses which were allowed to bid primarily. One is the UMTS license and another is the ISP license. Now, the spectrum that were bidding was same, but there were two different category of licenses with two different empowerment. The USL license had full empowerment to do whatever they want, including voice. ISP services licenses, ability to do data, ability to do voice was not there. They were doing data. Now, why did they do that? Let me ask you this fundamental question. Why did DOT or TRAI, who recommended it, maybe they have recommended it, or DOT went and laid out an IA condition like this for eligibility conditions? Because at that time it was believed that WiMAX was supposed to get in. They never had a clue that LTE is a technology is going to become successful in the bidding process. They were all looking for WiMAX, and the WiMAX was a pure data technology with no mobile integration. It was not a 3GPP technology. That is the reason why this condition was laid out, and nobody will tell you this story because I knew it, because I was there right in front of it. It was an WiMAX story at that time. There was no 4G, no LTE. when we bid as Qualcomm, we actually brought LT on the table. And that was the first time the whole universe of this BWA thing turned upside down. It was never before that anybody had a clue when this NIA condition was written that they will deploy a full-fledged, mobile technology, because WiMAX and 3G never had any integration at that time because both were of different type of standard. One was a 3GPP standard, another was an IEEE standard. Okay, so that is one. Now let's get to the CAG report and let's understand what is going on in the CAG report. So I'll start from the beginning. It's a long report, but I'll show you that what kind of problems that CAG actually identified and where CAG went wrong. So first, let's look at the title of this heading of this paragraph or this item, which says lack of due diligence in auction of spectrum for broadband wireless service. Another thing which I like to tell you, friend, this was never articulated broadband wireless earlier. It was an WiMAX spectrum auction at the time when the TRI came out with all the recommendation in past. And if you look at the recommendation before, some years before, it was always considered as WiMAX, WiMAX, WiMAX. The term BWA was pushed by us, and we pushed BWA because we wanted to make it technology neutral, right? But we never, the LTE and the 4G, the LTE technology was never out in the public domain. Everybody considered the BWA was analogous to WiMAX at that time. Okay. So with that background, let's look at what CAG said. The NIA for BWA auction suffered from deficiency in the scope of usage of spectrum for different classes of license. The USL and the CMTL license, the ISP operator are allowed to bid for the BWA spectrum. The usage of spectrum was governed by the respective license, which I told you. And this led to post-auction demand by MS Infotel codes, which could have enabled them to provide services beyond the scope of the ISP license. What happened? Let me just tell you that USL license had all capability, and they were supposed to take the code because these codes were required. So this code, what was there? This is the allowed to receive BWA spectrum, and this led to the post-auction demand by MS Infotel codes. This code is very important because without this code, you cannot offer voice services. So what they're saying, MS Infotel with an ISP license got these codes. So that is the main allegation. They should not have got this code with the ISP license. And then they said that DOT facilitated the request by permitting them to migrate to unified license after the auction, and this migration allowed a price discovery, was allowed in the price discovery of 2001 and resulting in an undue advantage of 3,367.29 crores. This is the summary. Right? And after 4 years, BWA service rollout was negligible, and I'll tell you the reason why it was negligible. Right? So let's first go into step by step. Reserve price was this much. So there, the CAG is pointing out very, very important points, by the way. CAG is not, just doing a they have not done a sloppy job. But their conclusion is wrong. And therefore, that is what I wanted to tell you about the 3,000 number. This number that they have mentioned here, 367 crores. So the first thing CAG is saying that deficiency is notice in inviting application. What they're saying that you allowed weak player to participate in the auction. Maybe correct. Yes. There were a lot of non-serious players participating in the auction. But this is neither here nor there. Because there was an upfront payment requirement in case of BWA spectrum. So if a non-serious player participated in the auction, he would not have been allowed to, he could not pay that amount of money, which is 12,800 plus crores. So this absence of financial parameter was mitigated by the clause of upfront payment. It does not matter. So to me, this identification, the eligibility criteria makes no sense. It's a waste of time. Okay? Because there was a need of upfront payment. So this is point number one. Right? So this NIA failed, etc. is of no relevance to me because I do not understand why this is important when there is a clause of upfront payment. Now, there is one other thing which is very important to point out: absence of lock-in provision, which is correct, which CAG is saying, because USL CMT license has a lock-in period that if you acquire spectrum, you can't sell. Whereas the ISP license didn't have a lock-in period, and therefore people sold spectrum, like we Qualcomm also sold spectrum. So there are many people who transferred their spectrum right to somebody else, which probably is not correct because you should have uniform rules for all different licenses. So absence of lock-in period, I give it to CAG. It says that Qualcomm, who was a new entrant and won spectrum for 4 service areas, sold it in 18th October 2013, and the company without any rollout. Factually correct. No problems with that. Right? Then comes the disparity in the scope of usage of BWA spectrum. Now here, CAG is going on and saying that yes, the USL license and the ISP license did have different scope of capability, both bid for the same spectrum, but the scope was different. Means once you get the spectrum, the scope that you have in order for you to offer services is anchored by the license condition. So ISP license can only do data, and the USL and CMT license can do both voice and data together. But so that is where the problem comes. But my point is, it is irrelevant. I'll tell you why it is irrelevant. Even if the license conditions differed, even if the ISP and the USL license didn't have the same scope, right? The bid price of the BWA spectrum is determined by the licensee who value the spectrum most. Because there were only, how many slots were there? There were only 2 slots. Right? So when there were 2 slots and there were so many USL license gunning for BWA spectrum, then ISP license valuation of the spectrum didn't matter. They were driven by what? There were so many players who were bidding for the spectrum. Look at this table. Look at this table. There were so many. There were how many? There were 11 players bidding for only 2 slots. So what would the ISP? So ISP licensee would have valued the spectrum less compared to the USL license. That I understand that because their scope was different. But they were driven by the valuation which was done by the USL and the CMTS operator, because they had the full empowerment to do whatever they wanted with that spectrum. So saying that because of this scope, this disparity in the scope of usage operator created a valuation problem in the BWA spectrum is completely wrong. I completely disagree with this point because it was forced by the valuation which the USL licensee saw in the spectrum. So if you had bid less than the USL license valuation, then you would have lost the auction. So it does not matter whether your scope is different or not. So this is a very important point, right? So then comes a very important issue, which is actually a administrative issue, which is a fault of DOT, because DOT came out with such a structure of auction where they didn't have any synergy between the licenses, the ISP license, the USL license, all with different scope participating in the same auction. And then end of the day, WiMAX got completely rooted out because nobody participated in the WiMAX spectrum, and the LTE became the technology. So LTE became a 3GPP technology. They had the capability to do voice. So Reliance Jio or Infotel asked for those codes, country codes and mobile network codes, so they gave it to them. And then when audit objection was raised, then the DOT replied. What DOT replied? DOT said that although the allocation of MCC and MNC code can technically enable an operator to set up a PLN, public land mobile network, but no operator would have offered such service beyond the scope of the license. So though they gave them the code, but they're saying, but anyway, you paid for the license. You have a different license, I do understand. You have an ISP license, somebody has an USL license, but you participate in the auction and paid full value for the spectrum auction because your valuation is driven by the USL license who valued the spectrum more because they were fully empowered. So it didn't really matter whether the codes were given or no codes were given. It didn't matter because the spectrum was purchased on a market base. But yes, the fact is that how much the license is valued, the USL license, the ISP license, then comes the question about the valuation of the license. We will talk about that now. Now let's forget about the lack of intermediate milestone. 3G also did not have any milestone. Because there was an understanding at that time when I was participating in all the open house, because when you pay upfront for spectrum, then there is no need to have any mandatory rollout condition. You would roll out, otherwise you will go out of business because you have paid upfront for the why you should be sitting on spectrum. Right? If you have a deferred payment obligation, then you can sit on spectrum, do nothing, because there is nothing that you can, there is no stake in the game. So you paid for the spectrum, so you should be using that spectrum. So that was the whole idea, that rollout obligation criteria were very, very minimal, right? Now, Yeah, so that is what CAG is saying. Thus, allowing an ISP operator to obtain a BWA spectrum price equal equal to the price paid by the USL operator when the service they could offer by the USL operator much wider than scope is not justified, because as I told you, the ISP operator is participating in the bidding and they are bidding against the USL operator. There is no way they would have got the spectrum at a lower price. This is hilarious. Okay, so let's leave this, and then comes to fixation of, this is absolutely important. Fixation of a lower spectrum usage charge for BWA spectrum, which I was fighting at that time, because 3G actually had a higher spectrum usage charge. BWA was a lower spectrum usage charge, and then they committed another big error in the NIA document. They said, and because of the WiMAX, mindset, because there was no integration possible between BWA spectrum and the 3G spectrum, they wanted the revenues from the BWA spectrum to be reported separately with only 1% SUC. This is the problem with regulation. See, we think too much about that we know everything. See, we are not, we do not have the capability to understand how the market is going to behave. There were no visionary understanding that LT is going to come and there will be direct integration with 3G. That was not the perception. Therefore, they kept a lower SUC charge, thinking that we want broadband in our country. Therefore, 1% SUC charges was levied, and this was not correct, because I was fighting against it, right? So then comes the lack of action against conflict. This is important. Now, why this is important? Because what the CAG is saying, that whoever participated in the BWA auction, he didn't have the financial might to pay 12,800 crores, 12,200 crores, right? So how come he collected so much amount of money? So there has to be a connivance. I can make no comments about that. I don't know what happened. So I will just leave this clause as it is. Then migration to the USL license holder by the ISP. Holding BWA spectrum. Now, what CAG is saying, that the UL license had a value attached to it, which was 16,000 crores, right? And it was discovered in 2001. ISP license was the 1 rupee license, right? That was the understanding at the time. So how could you allow an ISP holder to migrate to a unified license when they have not paid for the unified license? They should first get the unified license, right? Correct. So that was what the understanding was at that particular point of time. Now, why did anybody took an ISP license? Because ISP license at that particular point of time was costing a meager amount. There was nothing. So USL license used to cost 1,600 plus crores, right? Now, why did the USL license cost 6,100 crores? Because the auction happened bundled with spectrum at that time. But DOT and TRI did nothing to change the license condition in such a way that the cost of USL license was extracted out from the spectrum that was bundled along with it. You should come out with a different price for USL license, which was deprived of the spectrum, but they didn't do that. So they kept, pursuing the same price till 2010, which is 1,600 crore, which was bundled with the license. Another mistake that they did was, because they knew that there will be a problem going forward, and there will be multiple people who would apply for USL license, and they will ask for 2G spectrum, which they don't have to give. So they mentioned one clause in the NIA saying that if you apply for USL license, then there is no guarantee to get spectrum. Now these two clauses actually CAG latch onto it. So they said that the value of USL license is 1,600 crores. But what happened is that you gave Reliance Jio the USL license, allowed migration from ISP license to USL license at a cost of 1,600 crores, which is a price which was discovered in year 2001. That is what CAG is saying, right? So so there are many other, jugglery here, which is very complex, which I don't want to get into this. Otherwise, the whole discussion will become very, very, confusing. So let's not get into that. Let's focus on that. It is observed that Reliance Jio, formerly known as Infotel, was the first to take benefit of the scheme and paid UL entry fee of 15 crores, because there is a new license which the DOT came out with, which was deprived of spectrum, and an additional migration fee of 1,658 crores in August 13, which Reliance Jio paid and said that, look, if there is an allegation that I got this whole license free, so I might as well pay the 1600 crore price, which was a price which was discovered with bundle spectrum, right? So Reliance Jio was granted in USL license in October 2023. Okay. So the decision to grant an ISP license with the BWA spectrum to operate in the voice telephony helped ISP to circumvent the restriction offered the license. But again, it does not matter. They were driven by the USL license holder valuation. So it does not matter, the valuation of the spectrum was driven by the licensee who valued the spectrum more, which was USL license. So therefore, then they say the entry fee of 16,058 crores was discovered in 2001 through a bidding process of 4 cellular license. And this price did not reflect the present value of the 2013. See, look, if you are going to auction a license without any spectrum, people will pay zero fee. There is nothing, unless you restrict the number of licenses. Let's say I'm going to give you only one license. If you have n number of licenses, you auction them, everybody will pay zero because there is no valuation attached to it. So this is exactly what DOT said. In the reply, DOT said that the provision of the UL guidelines, 16,558 crores has been taken from Reliance to shift from ISPA license to UL license without allocation of any bundle spectrum. The discovery prices of 1,600 crores in 2001 was bundled with 4.4 megahertz spectrum. Now what is CAG saying? DOT's contention in this regard that the USL fees of 1,600 crores included 4.4 megahertz of spectrum is not correct, as this was the price of the USL license to be eligible for administrative allocation of startup spectrum without any guarantee of spectrum. See, why would anybody participate in an auction without any guarantee of spectrum unless you restrict the number of license? And therefore, there were too many USL licenses who had paid 1,600 crores and are still waiting for at that time it actually happened, right? Because of those, queue that understand the 2G scam. Even the clause of 3.3 of the NIM mentioned that the prospective new entrant must note that the notice that this notice does not imply that they are anyway such bidder if successful in renewing 3G and BWA spectrum, and in obligation to obtain a USL license is also awarded a startup 2G spectrum. Now you understand what is the problem with this whole argument. The problem with the argument, let me summarize. I will not summarize everything. Reliance Jio Reliance Jio's company, Infotel, got BWA spectrum, participated in the auction. They were driven by the valuation of the USL license. Once they took the spectrum, they were given some codes which empowered them. DOT defended saying that giving them the code does not mean that they are empowered to do voice services. Then they migrated their ISP license to USL license. They paid 1,600 crores. 1,600 crores were supposed to be paid without any guarantee of any kind of 2G spectrum allocation. CAG is saying that this price was discovered, but CAG is forgetting that the price was discovered because there was a spectrum attached to it. And then they are pointing out to DOT saying that you said that you are going to basically, if anybody asks for USL license, there is no guarantee to spectrum. So is it not a circular argument to make? Is it not a circular argument to make? Now, forget about the rollout condition, etc. Now, this point about the loss of this 3,367 crores actually is what they are trying to kind of extrapolate from this number of 1,658 crores, which I think is not correct. Because when you have participated in the auction and you have been driven by the USL licensees, as far as the valuation is concerned, and then on top of you paid 1,600 crores with no guarantee for spectrum, then where is the loss? Because that entity, that money that you paid, 16,058 crores, actually is of no value, right? Because ultimately DOT came out with the USL license with 15 crores only, because they strip out the spectrum from the license. So therefore, I believe this conclusion is totally wrong and misleading. But there were many references in this document which is correct, which should have been taken into consideration. It is a mistake of DOT and TRAI. They have not rectified their own house before they laid out the auction, and that led to this mess. Otherwise, this mess would not have happened, and this kind of completely clouds the public perception. See, you should argue and you should fight for issues which are genuine in nature, like the SUC. 1%. There is no need to have 1% SUC for BWA and 3% SUC for or 5% SUC for 3G. That is a valid point, but this is not a valid point. This is absolutely bogus. thanks friend, already 25 minutes have passed in this video, 24 minutes, so it's gone a little longer, but this is actually very important for those who want to understand what went wrong, because we have been driven by a lot of misinformation, and therefore I believe that the parliamentary committee recommending usage of spectrum is not correct, because you don't know what technology and what kind of usage will happen. What you need to do is to contain the interferences or the kind of harm that is going to cause of the usage in a band which is nearby. You have to set out those technical limitations, but you can't control the usage, right? Thank you friends for your time. I'll come back and thanks for listening, and I'll come back with a new video next time when a new topic.